The card on the table in front of me said family friend. Not dad, not father of the bride, not even Robert Harmon, which is my name. Just family friend, printed in the same elegant script as everything else at my daughter's wedding, as though whoever typed it had paused for half a second, couldn't think of a better way to describe me, and moved on. I sat there for a moment and just looked at it. Table 19. The round was tucked near the back of the ballroom, close enough to the kitchen that I could hear the clatter of plates being stacked, far enough from the main floor that the speeches would be difficult to hear. To my left was a woman named Dolores, who drove down from Albany and had been my daughter's second-grade teacher. To my right was a couple I had never met, friends of Derek's family from somewhere in Connecticut, pleasant enough people who had no idea who I was and didn't ask. Up at the front, at the long rectangular table draped in ivory linen and surrounded by candles, sat my daughter. She was laughing at something Derek had whispered to her, and she looked beautiful. I had thought that the moment I saw her walk down the aisle. I had thought it from where I sat, in the 6th row, because I had not been asked to walk her. That honor had gone to Gerald Whitfield, Derek's father, who had apparently offered, and apparently my daughter had said yes, without telling me until 3 days before the wedding. And when I asked her about it, she said, "Dad, it's not a big deal. Gerald wanted to be involved. You understand." I said I understood. That was 6 months ago. The night of the wedding, sitting at table 19 near the kitchen, reading the card that said, family friend, I was beginning to understand something different. My name is Robert Harmon. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, and I retired early because my knees were going and because I had planned carefully and saved everything I could. My wife, Sandra, passed away 11 years ago from a very fast and very cruel illness that gave us 4 months between diagnosis and the end. My daughter, Claire, was 22 at the time. She had just started her 2nd year of graduate school, studying business administration at a university in Philadelphia. And after her mother died, I made her a promise. I told her she would not have to worry about money. I told her I would handle it. I handled it. The graduate degree cost $64,000 over 2 years. I paid it. When Claire finished her MBA and moved to the city to work at a consulting firm, she needed first and last month's rent on an apartment that cost more than my first mortgage. I paid it. When the consulting firm folded 18 months later and she spent 4 months unemployed and calling me in tears, I transferred $2,200 to her account every month without being asked, because I knew she was too proud to ask, and I did not want her to have to. When she met Derek and they got engaged and she called me so happy I could hear it before she finished the sentence, I told her I would pay for the wedding. She said it wasn't necessary. I said I wanted to. She said she and Derek had it under control. I said I was her father and I wanted to contribute. She said fine. She would let me know what they needed. She let me know they needed $47,000. I paid it. By the time Claire's wedding arrived, I had spent $214,000 on my daughter over 11 years. I had never once asked for any of it back. It was not a loan. I never called it a loan. I never wrote it down, or made her sign anything, or handed it over with conditions. I gave it because she was my daughter and she needed it, and I was her father. That was the whole of it. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for everything that came after. The trouble, the real trouble, the kind that makes you sit alone in a parking lot after the reception trying to figure out how you got here, it didn't start at the wedding. It started about 8 months before, when Claire called me on a Tuesday evening, and her voice had that particular quality she'd had since she was 12, the one that meant she was about to ask me something she already knew I wouldn't like. She said Derek's family was very involved in the wedding planning. I said that was wonderful. She said Derek's mother, Patricia, had a lot of opinions about the venue and the guest list. I said that was fine. It was a big day for both families. She paused. Then she said that Patricia felt the wedding should feel cohesive, that it should feel like one unified family rather than 2 separate sides, and that Derek had agreed, and they had decided to do a seating arrangement that mixed people together rather than separating the families. I said that sounded nice. She said there was one other thing. She said her role in the planning had been a little heavier than Derek's because Derek was working very long hours, and that Patricia had been so helpful, really so incredibly helpful, and that she and Patricia had gotten very close over the past few months. She said it in the way you say something when you're building toward a point, layering in the groundwork before you get there. I waited. She said Patricia had suggested, and Derek agreed, and she herself thought it made sense, that Gerald walk her down the aisle. She said Gerald was Derek's father, and he was very eager to be part of the ceremony, and she thought it would be a beautiful gesture of the two families becoming one. I asked her to say that again. She said it again. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the day Claire was born, the specific smell of that hospital room, the way Sandra cried and laughed at the same time, and I just stood there with my hand over my mouth because I didn't know what else to do with all of it. I thought about teaching Claire to ride a bike in the driveway of the house on Elwood Street. I thought about driving her to Philadelphia with her mother's old suitcases in the back of my truck because we couldn't afford a moving service. I said, Claire, I'm your father. She said, I know, Dad. It's just a ceremony. You'll be in the front row. You'll be right there. I said, I want to walk you down the aisle. She said, Gerald is really excited about it, and Derek really wants him involved. I don't want to make this complicated. I asked her when she had decided this. She said she and Derek had talked about it for a while. I asked if it had occurred to her to tell me before it was decided. She said she was telling me now. I didn't push after that. I have never been the kind of man who forces a situation. I said I needed some time to think about it, and she said, okay, and we hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I looked at the coffee going cold in my mug. I thought about the $47,000 I had already handed over for this wedding, the deposit I had paid 6 months earlier, the checks I had written for the caterer and the florist and the venue itself. I thought about the $214,000, and then I thought about the fact that the mind that had walked Claire to Philadelphia with her mother's suitcases was going to sit in the 6th row while a man she had known for 2 years walked her down the aisle in my place. I did not cancel the checks. I want to be clear about that too. I did not call Claire back and say I was pulling the money. I paid everything I had promised to pay. I showed up to the wedding in my good suit, and I sat in the 6th row, and I watched Gerald Whitfield, who is a perfectly decent man who did nothing wrong in this situation, walk my daughter toward the rest of her life. I clapped. I stood when they said to stand. I smiled when the photographer pointed a camera at me. And then I went to find my table, and I found the card that said, Family Friend. There is a moment, and I think most people know this moment, where something tips. It's not dramatic. There is no shattering sound. It's more like when you've been carrying a heavy box for a long time, and you feel the shift in your grip, and you know before it happens that you are about to drop it. I sat at table 19 and I ate the salmon, and I listened to the speeches, the ones I could hear from where I was sitting, and I watched Gerald and Patricia at the head table, and I watched Claire laughing and leaning into Derek, and I felt the box starting to go. I did not make a scene. I did not approach Claire or Derek or anyone in the Whitfield family. I finished my dinner. I danced once with Dolores, the 2nd grade teacher, because she asked, and I didn't want to be rude. I left before the cake was cut. I drove home, which took 2 hours, and when I got inside, I sat at the kitchen table in my good suit, and I did not sleep. In the morning, I called my attorney. His name is Warren Peck, and we have known each other for 26 years. I met him when I was handling Sandra's estate, what little there was of it, and he was patient and thorough and never made me feel foolish for not knowing things I had no reason to know. Over the years, I had called him a handful of times with questions, and he always answered. I trusted him completely. I told Warren I needed to sit down with him. He asked if it was urgent. I said it was important. He had an opening on Thursday. When I sat down in Warren's office, I brought a folder. Inside the folder, I had printed bank statements going back 11 years. Wire transfers and checks, and one envelope of cash receipts from the early years when Claire was in graduate school, and the transfers sometimes came out of my personal account in cash because she needed it fast. I had the tuition payment confirmations. I had the lease guarantee I had co-signed on her apartment. I had the bank records showing the monthly $2,200 transfers during her period of unemployment. I had the email from Claire asking for $47,000 for the wedding, with the itemized breakdown she had sent along with it. Venue deposit, catering minimum, florist retainer, photography package, the rest. Warren looked at everything for a long time. He is methodical. He does not speak until he is finished looking. When he was finished, he looked up at me and said, "Robert, what are you asking me to do?" I said I wasn't sure yet. I said I needed to understand what my options were. He said that was a reasonable place to start. We talked for an hour and a half. Warren explained that the question of whether money given to a family member constitutes a gift or a loan is rarely simple, and that without a written agreement at the time of transfer, the default assumption in most states is that the money was a gift. He said this was the standard I would be working against. He also said that email records, particularly ones in which the recipient acknowledges the amounts and the purpose and the circumstances, could be relevant. He asked if I had kept Claire's messages over the years. I had kept everything. I am an engineer by training. Engineers keep records. Warren said he would review the correspondence. He said he was not promising anything, and he needed me to understand that before we went any further. He said family financial disputes were among the most painful and least predictable things he handled, and that I needed to be prepared for multiple outcomes, including outcomes I would not like. I said I understood. He asked me why I wanted to do this. I thought about it for a moment. I said it wasn't about the money. Not really. Not in the way that sounds. I said I had given everything I had to give, and I had done it without conditions, and I had expected nothing back. I said that I had thought I was her father, that I had believed we had a relationship built on something. I said the money was just the thing that made the rest of it possible to look at directly. The wedding, the table, the card that said family friend that was harder to put a number on, but the money I had records for. Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, let me look at what you have." It took Warren 4 weeks to go through everything. He called me on a Friday afternoon and said he had found something in the email correspondence that he thought was significant. 2 years before the wedding, Claire had gone through a brief period where she thought she might leave the consulting firm she'd joined after the first one folded and start something of her own, a boutique firm. She had talked to me about it at length over several phone calls, and in one email exchange, she had asked me whether I would be willing to invest, and I had said yes, I would consider it depending on the structure. In my reply, I had written, "I want to make sure we handle it properly this time, not the way we've been doing it, where I just give you things. If I put money into a business, I'll want to do it as a formal investment, the same way I'd want anything I've given you before to be documented properly going forward." Warren said that phrase, "the same way I'd want anything I've given you before to be documented properly," combined with Claire's response, which was, "I know, Dad, you've always been so generous with the loans, and I appreciate it more than you know," was useful. She had used the word loans. In writing, he said it was not a guarantee. He said a good attorney on the other side would argue the word was used casually, colloquially, without legal intent. He said we would have to let a judge decide what it meant. I asked him whether I should send Claire a letter first. He said that was my decision. He said some people preferred to handle these things quietly between family before involving the court. He said others found that approach made things worse. He asked what my relationship with Claire looked like right now. I told him we had spoken twice since the wedding. Both conversations were brief. She had called to ask if I had gotten home safely, and once to share a photo from the honeymoon. She had not asked how I was. She had not mentioned the table, or the card, or any of it. She spoke to me the way you speak to someone you are maintaining a connection with because you feel you should, not because you want to. Warren said, "Send the letter." I wrote it myself, and Warren reviewed it. It was not a legal document. It was a letter. 2 pages, single-spaced, on plain white paper. I went through the history, the graduate school tuition, the apartment, the monthly transfers, the wedding costs, and I gave the total, which came to $214,000. I said that for many years I had provided this support without expectation or condition because I loved her and because her mother would have wanted her taken care of. I said that I had attended her wedding and I had been seated at table 19 with a card that described me as a family friend. I said I had watched a man I had met 4 times walk her down the aisle in the place I had imagined standing since the day she was born. I did not say I was angry. I tried not to write the letter angry. I said that I was writing to ask her to consider what our relationship had become, and whether she felt that the support I had provided over 11 years had been received in the spirit it was given. I said that if she believed the money was given with no expectation of any kind, not financial repayment, not acknowledgement, not the basic dignity of being recognized as her father at the most significant moment of her adult life, then I needed her to tell me that directly. I said that if she could tell me, clearly, that she believed she owed me nothing, I would know how to proceed. I mailed it certified. She received it on a Tuesday. She called me that Thursday. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. I know because I looked at my phone afterward. She was not calm. She said she couldn't believe I was doing this. She said the wedding had been beautiful, and she had thought I enjoyed myself. I asked her how she had arrived at that conclusion. She said I hadn't said anything. I told her that was not the same as enjoying myself. She said if I had a problem, I should have said something at the time. I said I had said something 3 days before the wedding, when I called her after the conversation about Gerald, and she told me it wasn't a big deal. She said that was different. She said the table arrangement had been Patricia's idea, and she hadn't wanted to cause drama by changing it. I asked her if it occurred to her that her father being described as a family friend might cause something in me. She said she hadn't seen the cards personally. She said the planner had handled all of that. I asked her about the money. Her voice changed. It went from emotional to careful, which is a shift I have heard in negotiations before. In meetings where someone realizes the conversation has moved to a place where words will have consequences. She said, "Dad, you gave that money to me. You never said it was a loan." I said, "You did." She said, "What?" I said, 2 years ago, in an email. You called it loans. You used the word, "I have the email." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was using it loosely. You know what I meant. You gave me that money because you wanted to. Nobody made you do it." I said, "That's true." She said, "So what are you actually asking me, Dad? Do you want me to pay you back? Is that what this is?" I said I wanted her to understand that I had spent 11 years and $214,000 being her father, and that I had been seated at her wedding next to her second-grade teacher with a name card that called me a stranger, and that I was asking her to look at both of those things at the same time and tell me what she thought. She said, "That's not fair." I said I agreed. She said, "I need to talk to Derek." I said, "Take your time." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand and looked out the kitchen window at the yard that Sandra had planted every spring for 17 years, and that I had kept up as best I could since she died, because it seemed like the right thing to do. 3 weeks passed. Her attorney contacted Warren. I will not pretend this did not hurt me. There is a particular kind of pain that lives in the space between who you thought someone was and what they show you when things get hard, and it is not like other pain. It does not announce itself. It sits with you quietly, and it is heaviest at 3 in the morning when you can't sleep, and the house is completely still, and you understand, really understand, in a way you can't during the day, that the person you raised does not see you the way you thought they did. Her attorney was a young woman named Patterson, who was aggressive and well-prepared, and who argued in the initial exchange of correspondence that every dollar I had provided was given freely, without documentation, without any contemporaneous indication of expectation of repayment, and that the word loans in a single email did not constitute a binding agreement and reflected casual conversational usage rather than legal intent. Warren had expected all of this. He filed suit for $214,000. The response from Patterson was that the claim had no merit and would be vigorously defended. Derek's father, Gerald, apparently contacted Warren's office directly. At one point, I was not told the details of that conversation, only that Warren handled it and that I did not need to worry about it. The case took 9 months to get to court. In those 9 months, I spoke to Claire twice. Both times were brief and practical, arranged through the attorneys, for the narrow purpose of confirming that I still had certain records she wanted copies of. She did not ask how I was. I did not ask how she was. We were polite in the way that strangers are polite. I thought about her constantly. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to tell this story as though I was steady the whole way through, certain and resolved, and that would be a lie. There were nights when I almost called Warren to say I wanted to drop it. There was a Sunday afternoon in February when I drove past the church where Sandra and I got married, and I sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes and thought about what Sandra would say to me if she were here. I think she would have said something practical and something kind and something that cut straight to the center of the thing, the way she always did. And I think I would have listened and probably cried, and I think it would have helped. But she wasn't there, and I had to figure it out on my own. I did not drop the case. The hearing lasted 2 days. It was not a jury trial. A family court judge heard arguments from both sides. Warren presented the bank records, the tuition confirmations, the email chain, the text messages over the years in which Claire had referred to money I sent as the loan payment on at least 2 occasions. Warren found those in a thread from 4 years ago, and I had forgotten they existed. Patterson argued that the overall pattern of giving over 11 years, always unconditional, always unasked, established the clear character of the transfers as gifts. She brought a financial expert who testified about the typical characteristics of intra-family gift transfers. She was thorough and professional, and I can say, without bitterness, that she did her job well. The judge, whose name was Honorable Marcus Webb, was a quiet man who asked precise questions and wrote a lot of notes. He did not tip his hand during testimony. His expression during 2 days of proceedings was exactly the same, attentive and neutral, like someone who has heard a great many versions of the same human difficulty and has trained himself to receive each one without reaction. He took 3 weeks to issue his ruling. Warren called me on a Thursday afternoon when I was in the backyard, turning over the soil in Sandra's garden, getting ready for spring. I was wearing old gloves, and my boots were dirty. I sat down on the back step and listened. The judge ruled in my favor on $172,000. He found that the graduate school tuition, the apartment assistance, and the monthly transfers during unemployment when taken together with the email documentation using the word loans and the 2 text messages referencing loan payments established sufficient pattern and acknowledgement to support the interpretation that the transfers were expected to be returned. He declined to award the $47,000 for the wedding on the grounds that my written communication requesting the amount had used the phrase, "I want to contribute," which he found indicated voluntary gift intent. He also wrote, "In the section of the ruling I have read more times than I can count, something that I will try to reproduce as accurately as I can from memory, that the court recognized the complexity of financial relationships within families, and that the absence of formal documentation does not erase the reasonable expectations of the party who provided support, particularly when that support was acknowledged in the party's own communications as something other than a pure gift." I read that sentence, and I read it again, and I sat on my back step in my dirty boots for a long time. I did not cry. I am not sure what I felt, exactly. It was something quieter than relief and heavier than satisfaction. It was the feeling of being told by an outside party that you were not wrong, that what you understood to be real was in fact real, that you had not misread the whole of it. That night I made dinner and ate it at the kitchen table and went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept. The payment arrived in 4 installments over 6 months, as structured by the judgment. Derek's family was involved in financing it. I know this not from Claire, but because Warren mentioned it in passing, the way he sometimes lets details fall into conversation without making a point of them. I do not know what that cost Derek in his relationship with his parents. That is not something I think about much. Claire and I have not spoken since the verdict. I am not certain we will. I want to be careful here, because I am aware that there is a version of this story where the father is the hero and the daughter is the villain, and everything resolves cleanly. And I do not think that is the true version. I think Claire grew up and made choices about her life and about what she valued and about who she needed to protect. And I think Derek's family filled a space in her life that I was not able to fill, and I think she made decisions from that place that she may or may not regret. I think she is capable of being a good person, and I think she acted badly. I think both of those things are true at the same time, the way they usually are. I think about the day she was born, and I do not regret a single dollar. I think about table 19 and the card that said family friend, and I know that I was right to do what I did. Those two things sit next to each other in me, and I have stopped trying to make them resolve into one thing. They are both true, and they both belong to me, and I carry them the way you carry anything that is permanently yours. I keep Sandra's garden. Every spring I turn the soil and I plant what she planted, and I water it through the summer, and I cut back what needs cutting at the end of the season. It is not as good as it was when she did it. She had a knowledge of growing things that I never had, an instinct for it, and the garden knows the difference. But it continues. It comes back every year. Something in the roots knows what it is supposed to do. Last fall, I took a portion of the money, and I did something I had been putting off for 12 years. Sandra had always wanted to spend a month in Portugal. We had talked about it when we were first married, this vague someday plan that never became specific enough to happen. And then she got sick, and someday became never. I booked a rental in the Alentejo region, a small house on a property with olive trees, and I stayed for 26 days. I walked in the mornings. I ate well. I read the books that had been sitting on my nightstand for years. I sat on the terrace in the evenings and watched the light change on the hills, and I thought about Sandra, and I thought about Claire, and I thought about the 31 years I spent measuring and calculating and making sure things were built correctly, that the load was distributed, that the structure would hold. I thought about what holds and what doesn't. On the last evening before I flew home, I sat outside until it was fully dark and the sky was doing what skies do in places without much light pollution. Just tremendous and indifferent and old. And I thought, not for the first time, that I had done everything I knew how to do. I had built the best structure I could with what I had. And some things hold and some things don't. And an engineer knows that going in. You account for failure in your calculations. You build in the margin. You do the work anyway. I am 63 years old. I have my health, mostly, except for the knees. I have Warren's phone number, and a paid-off house, and a garden that comes back every year. I have 26 days in Portugal that belong to me and no one else, and that I did not get by waiting for anyone's permission. I have $172,000 that the law decided was mine. I gave my daughter everything I had. I would do it again. I would change almost nothing about the giving of it. The only thing I would change is that I would have written it down. Not because I didn't trust her then, because I didn't know yet who she would become, and you cannot know that ahead of time. You do your best, and you hope, and you keep records of what you can. I am still her father. That is the one thing nobody has a ruling on. It was true when she was born, and it was true at table 19, and it was true in the courtroom, and it will be true until I am gone. Whatever she does with that is hers to decide. I cannot control it. I have stopped trying. What I can control is this. I turn the soil in the spring. I water in the summer. I sit on the back step in the evenings and watch what Sandra planted come back again, the way it always does. That is enough. I have decided it is enough. And some mornings I even believe it.